and how do we move ahead. So first, from everything you've heard, there are some clear, inconvenient truths. There are two major things that we must understand. One, that climate change is not about the future, it is happening now. And I say this particularly because I'm really old in this discussion. When I was at Rio, when the Framework Convention on Climate Change was being discussed, debated, and decided upon, we were talking about climate change that would happen in the future. We were talking about modeling that was happening, and therefore the question was, were the models right? Were the models wrong? Would it actually? And I often call it the age of innocence, that we genuinely, absolutely believed that this would be reversed. The fact is, every record that is made every year is broken. The heat record is broken every year. At CSC, we produce an annual State of Extreme Weather Event report. And each year we find, and we take essentially data from the IMD, and we put together the full picture. And the bottom line of it is that almost every day in the year, some region or the other in India is experiencing an extreme weather event. Let me repeat this for you. Almost every day of the year, we have an extreme weather event. Now we have to understand the huge cost of this on the poor, on the vulnerable, but we also have to understand, and that's the point that Shombi and Sham have made, is that climate change is a great equalizer. It is in many ways like the air of Delhi. All of us could have air purifiers at home and believe that we are protected, but we are not. We have to breathe the same air. So there is no doubt that the poor of Delhi are worst impacted, but let's be absolutely clear. There is nobody in Delhi who is not facing the health burden of really severe air pollution in our city. It's the same with climate change. And that's why climate change is one of those very unique and perhaps the most unique opportunity in the world to have a collaborative agreement. You cannot, and that's where I agree with Shombi, this requires multilateralism. I completely disagree with all my colleagues who say, UN, we need to move out of UN to discuss climate. We cannot, because UN is the only place where countries come together. And climate change is an agreement which will demand countries to work together. It's the ultimate socialist project of the world, where the rich have to reduce so the poor can grow. There is absolutely no way else that this will work. And the fact of cooperation is also very important in the figures that you heard from all my colleagues. There is something called a carbon budget. What is a carbon budget? A carbon budget is simply the amount of carbon dioxide that you can emit to keep temperatures below a certain amount. So if you take 1.5 degrees centigrade rise, the world has a carbon budget. The fact of that carbon budget is that we will exhaust the 1.5 degree carbon budget by the end of this decade at current rates of growth. The second fact is even more worrying, and that is really why we need that cooperation, because by the end of this decade, 2030, 70% of the world population, that includes India, not China, 70% of the world population will have access to only 30% of the carbon budget. 30% of the world population would have appropriated, gobbled up 70% of the carbon budget. Now the question is, we can keep talking about the need for equity. And I mean, from somebody like me, Anil and I produced the report pre-Rio that said global warming in an unequal world. a case of environmental colonialism, and you ended up with getting a framework convention on climate change which had CBDR. Leena ji, actually it is Paris Agreement which is the worst, because that destroyed CBDR. It removed the phrase historical emissions. It undermined CBDR by essentially telling all countries of the world they needed to do as much as they could to reduce emissions. So the concept of NDCs was brought in to disable, to erase the concept of equity. But that said, that is the past. The question is, what about the future? Now, this is the reality that we need to think about. We are not going anywhere. We are 70% of the world population. We have access to only 30% of the world budget. We need our right to development. And if we don't develop differently, we will end up with polluting the atmosphere, adding to the stock of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, adding to more and more catastrophes that we are seeing today. There is now more and more data to tell us that migration in the world is happening because of the old reasons of migration, which is war and conflict, but there is also new reasons of migration, which is new displacement, drought, flood, agrarian distress, the combination of all that which is forcing people out of their homes. And we know that the rich of the world are today even more insecure because of migration than anything else. So you're creating a scenario where the world is going to get even more insecure. Now this is where, Leena ji, in my view, forgive me if I say so, and this is really for Shambi more than for you, I think the world should have rejected 300 billion. We should have, a no deal was better than the deal that we have come home with. The fact is, and this is where, Shambi, I fully understand why the UN wanted an agreement, but we have to understand what this means today. This is not even peanuts, it's crumbs, it's a joke. And you have literally consigned 70% of the world to say that they have no option but to do development in the way they do it today, which adds to the emissions in the atmosphere. So you're literally creating a disabling framework rather than an enabling framework. Now the two other things that I want to add to this is the other thing that happened at BAKU is what Ajay spoke about, which is the Article 6.4 or Article 6, I think it is. 6.4. So now let's sort of deconstruct this a little bit. So we know that the world needs low concessional finance. My colleagues did a report last year where they showed that all climate finance was coming in the name with more debt. Now this is coming to countries which are already under debt. So you're literally adding to the burden rather than reducing it. So we needed grant-based concessional finance, which was actually agreed upon at COP28 and undermined at COP29. So you've not got the money, but what you have got is the promise, as it was in Kyoto, of what would be called joint implementation. CDM, Clean Development Mechanism, which we started calling the corrupt development mechanism, the convoluted development mechanism, the cheap development mechanism. Now, you have that in the name of markets again, because the Western world has essentially thrown up its hands saying, oh, we have no public finance, let's the power of the market be unleashed. And the power of the market will get unleashed when we have the carbon credit system in place and people will buy and sell carbon credits and everybody will see transitions happen. Now, to me, and this is where, Leena ji, there's going to be huge risk, but a huge opportunity. The question is going to be, how do we use this carbon credits market? Do we waste it as we did in the past under CDM for cheap measures, or do we actually come up with a list, as actually Leena Ji's ministry has come up with, an excellent list of the high-end projects that we need to invest in under the carbon credits. So you're essentially saying we want transformation, but that transformation is going to cost, and if it's going to cost, let that money come from the markets. Now be very clear, this is not going to be the objective of all the smart verifiers, auditors, registries, all the smart developers in suits and boots who are running around the world developing this carbon credits market. They want cheap emission reductions, and they want it in your world. And this is where net zero comes in, Shyam. Because in net zero, the biggest opportunity is to grow trees, is to sequester carbon from trees. Technically, it's a win-win for us. You would say, we can grow trees, our poor people can benefit from it, we can make sure that those trees sequester carbon, and we can make sure that we get greening of India as well. No doubt. But the question is going to be, what's the price of the tree and the land and the labor that is going to be paid? My colleagues have just been investigating, have just been traveling to look at the current tranche of agroforestry projects that are being done in India, and you will be appalled by what you read. You won't be surprised, but you will be appalled. Because I think in this room at least people still get appalled. And so you will get appalled to say, what is happening? This is not what we mean by climate change. This is an existential threat. We need to come together for action and not find every opportunity to make sure that we can make a cheap buck somewhere or the other. So this is really the reality of the world. We are not going away. We have an opportunity to do things differently, and that's my last point. To me, the question for India has to be, how do we leverage the co-benefits that we could get from climate change? I don't believe we should act because of climate change. We should act because of the need for our own survival. Now, if you take the city of Delhi, which we all live in and breathe in or can't breathe in, then we know that the biggest reason why we have pollution in Delhi is the sheer number of cars. Do you know how many cars we register in Delhi a day? Just take a guess.
How is it?
500 cars, 1700 total vehicles. Okay? That's the number of cars we register just in Delhi. And just think of Gurgaon, Faridabad, Noida, that entire region. And what is even worse is our obsession for just chasing e-buses. Our ridership in buses is going down rather than going up. We have a huge crisis of mobility. There is a crisis of air pollution, but that is an opportunity to fix as well, because transport emissions are 20% of the global emissions that are responsible for climate change. So I could go on and on and on, but this is really where I believe the opportunity for us is. Secure the space for co-benefits, operate there, but insist that we want high-end technology which needs to be paid for, even if it's through the markets. We're not going to sell ourselves cheap anymore. That, to me, is going to be the bottom line that we can do for our survival. I'm not sure with Mr. Trump coming, what can we do for the world's survival? That, surely, I will leave to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sunita. You have not disappointed.